Welcome to the ABA Civil Rights and Social Justice Chair Chat. I am Lacy Durham, Chair of the Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice. As we move toward the 2025 elections and beyond, I am excited to welcome you to the next session in our CRSJ Perfecting Democracy Chair Chat series on voting rights and election protection. It is my pleasure to welcome Terry A.O. Minnis, Vice President of Census and Voting Programs for Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. Mrs. Minnis was appointed to the American Bar Association Standing Committee on Elections in 2020, has published in all 4 editions of the ABA's Elections Handbook, and has been counsel on numerous amicus briefs filed before the Supreme Court on voting rights cases, including being one of the key leaders in the campaigns to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act of 2006, including addressing the Supreme Court's decision in Shelby County versus Holder. She also serves as the administrator of the NEO State Infrastructure Fund's Voting Rights and Litigation Collaborative. Ms. Minnis is also a leading authority on census with experience that spans nearly 2 decades. Currently, she serves as co-chair of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights and Human Rights Census Task Force. Most recently, the U.S. Census Bureau announced her as one of 3 appointed members in its new 2030 Census Advisory Committee. She represents various stakeholder organizations and will assist the Census Bureau in devising strategies to increase awareness of and participation in the next decennial census, reduce barriers to response, and enhance the public's trust and willingness to respond. We are especially pleased to have Ms. Minnis join us, as she is uniquely prepared to make the case for the critical role the census plays in safeguarding voting rights and protecting the integrity of elections by ensuring fair representation through accurate population data. This data shapes the boundaries of voting districts and is essential in maintaining equal representation and upholding democratic principles in elections. It is also my pleasure to announce that Dr. Cynthia Swann will moderate today's session. Dr. Swann is Secretary of the ABA Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice, the chair of our Perfecting Democracy initiative, which aims to recruit lawyers and law students to support nonpartisan efforts to protect fair elections and voting rights at all levels. Within the ABA, Dr. Swann holds a presidential appointment to the Environmental Task Force, serves on the Executive Council of the Section of State and Local Government Law, is special counsel to the Criminal Justice Committee, and serves on the Task Force on Fair Elections and Voting Rights. Additionally, she is a valued member of the award-winning Human Rights Magazine editorial board. Dr. Swann also serves as Chief Administrative Officer of the Hip Hop Caucus Education Fund. For over 16 years and across 7 election cycles, the Hip Hop Caucus has mobilized hundreds of thousands of young BIPOC voters through their award-winning Respect My Vote campaign, fighting against voter suppression and advocating for election system reforms. Again, it is my pleasure to welcome our guests. Thank you.
Thank you to our ABA Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice Chair, Lacy Durham, for those kind introductions. And Terry, it is wonderful to see you again. It has been a pleasure working with you in the past, and it is truly an honor to have you here today. You have been on the front lines of our voting rights battles, whether in courtrooms, legislatures, or working within grassroots coalitions. And I welcome this conversation about the intersection of law, policy, and civil rights, and your insights on how we can work toward protecting and strengthening our direct democracy for all. So welcome, and you are not new to the ABA. You have incredible credentials. And so let's just begin by starting off with, broadly speaking, what are the specific barriers that marginalized communities face in exercising their right to vote generally, and also provide a perspective from the Asian American community? And so in your view, how have recent changes in voter ID laws or early voting restrictions affected voter protection?
Sure, great. Thank you, Cynthia. It is wonderful to see you again. I definitely have enjoyed being in the trenches with you, and I appreciate the ABA and the section for inviting me to have this conversation. I think that what's interesting, of course, in many of the barriers that face different marginalized communities, including communities of colors, the disability community and the like, are similar, right, in nature. We see a lot of barriers related to things like making voting more difficult, decreasing access, particularly in the different ways in which our communities may gravitate towards voting. We've also seen an increase in recent years in the advent of mis and disinformation in the election space. I think it's very interesting. In some ways, it's not new, right? We are very well aware of longstanding efforts to use deceptive robocalls, deceptive flyers, to try to deceive people. We have seen things like harmful political ads in the Asian American community with the strong anti-Chinese rhetoric. There was the infamous, Super Bowl ad that was aired with respect, playing on these long-standing tropes and stereotypes. But we also know that there is a new amplification and reach with the use of social media to be able to foment this mis and disinformation. And again, we know that that is something that is being used in to borrow the terminology from one of the court opinions, with surgical precision for different communities. So for the Asian American community, for example, we see people, having this information not just proliferating in the mainstream social media, platform, but also for our communities and other platforms where our communities may congregate, whether that's like WeChat, Kakao, and other platforms that also support a significant amount of in-language content, which of course makes it hard for us to potentially monitor, or as an extra layer to the monitoring and addressing of the mis and disinformation. And I think that that is also very indicative of one of the major barriers that Asian Americans face in voting, and that is the language barrier. Our our relationship with this country is a complicated one. We are the only group that has been explicitly country, right, in federal legislation. And that history has resulted in a stereotype of Asian Americans as perpetual foreigners. So there is an assumption, regardless of where one's nativity, regardless of one's English proficiency, that there's an assumption that Asian Americans are foreign, that they are not, citizens, and we've seen that play out in the election space. But before I get to that, going back to the language barriers issue, because of that long racist immigration history in this country, we have a significant portion of our community that are either immigrants or children of immigrants. And so we have language barriers that we face. About 3 in 4 Asian Americans speak a language other than English at home, and about a third of them, of Asian Americans, are limited English proficient or have some difficulty with the English language. And you can imagine how that plays out in the voting space. Voting is complicated, it's complex, even for native English speakers. When you add a layer of English being your second language and the processes being as complex and complicated as they are, it becomes that more daunting for limited English proficient voters to participate in the process. We also know that voting materials are written at a very high level. That is, I believe one study I saw had it at 12th grade or higher level of English being utilized. And we know that there are people that purposefully try to manipulate words, right, to get a desired effect. Particularly, I'm thinking about ballot initiatives. And so it's difficult to understand. Even when it's translated, that becomes difficult to translate, right? And so we have all these layers of additional barriers that face limited English proficient voters. And to the extent that they may be a first-time voter because they're newly naturalized, or they just haven't, had the opportunity to engage, if they have a bad experience at the polling place that first time they try to go because they don't understand what's going on, because they can't get the assistance they need or the assistance that they are, have a right to, or if they have a bad experience because they're being treated hostilely because they have an accent or the like, they're not going to come back to vote. And so that is going to be another barrier to their ability to vote. And one thing I did want to flag from the different policies that you had raised, one thing that we do know is that Asian Americans are some of the biggest users of vote by mail. And so as we see efforts to curtail vote by mail, restrict access to ballot boxes, or remove access to ballot boxes for the most part, that's going to be something that harms our community at an overwhelming rate. And so we definitely see that all of these barriers are compounding on themselves to make sure that our community isn't participating at the rates that they could be and should be. Asian Americans are among the fastest growing group in the country. Our electorate is also rapidly growing, but we still continue to see election after election, even as we're increasing our voter turnout, even as we're increasing our voter registration rates, they still lag behind that of non-Latino whites by about double digits, election after election. And so it is clear that even as we're making gains, we are not actually optimizing, the potential political power of our community.
Okay, you have given us a lot to unpack there. Let's, I am currently with the Hip Hop Caucus Education Fund, and of course, we're focused on the younger voters. And through our Respect My Vote campaign, and I know that you've been very much engaged in community coalition level engagements as well, broadly, not just with the Asian American community, but looking at all of the BIPOC community. And so my question to you would go to the younger voter. What do you see in terms of engagement of the younger voter, both in the Asian American community, but in the broader community, as broader BIPOC community, in terms of the younger voter becoming more engaged, understanding the impact, the influence, the importance of their vote, and do you see a change in the voting pattern coming into the 2024 election?
So I think that engaging all voters, and of course young voters, a lot of it is about actually meeting people where they are, addressing the issues that they care about, and what they feel is most relevant to their day-to-day living. I think that is something, and I know we've had conversations about this over the years, that when we approach voting and voter engagement, it needs to be an ongoing, year in, year out activity, right? Dropping in right before a big election and then dropping out is not really the way to be able to build power or to build interest and engagement in people. It becomes too transactional in nature, and what we really need to be doing is building these relationships so that we can understand what are the issues that motivate you. Right? If I'm sitting here talking about issue A and you care not one bit about issue A, that is not going to motivate you to engage. And that's not going to, turn on that light bulb of, oh, this is why it's important for me to vote. That's one thing I actually have been seeing in the organizing and civic engagement world, is the connecting of issues with voting, right? And so understanding that some people might have may be very interested in environmental issues. Some people may be very interested in immigration issues. Some people may be very interested in criminal reform issues. And it is really being able to engage with people and understand that, and then help them understand and make the connections as to why voting is so important. And that really is one of the reasons I think the C3 voter engagement work is so critical, because it really isn't about, we are not trying to convince you to vote one way or the other for this person or that person. All we're saying is you need to vote your interest, vote your conscience, but you need to vote, because that's how we make sure we have, leadership that represents the will of the people, is only if we all engage. If we don't, then we are stuck with trying to work with what we're stuck with. And it may be people who are actually completely opposed to what we care about, right? It's one thing if they don't care about it or they're not aware of it, then you have that opportunity to go in, advocate, and change their mind. It's a lot harder if they already have an opinion about it and it's completely the opposite of what you're trying to advocate for. That, of course, does not mean you don't need to go in and advocate and do your best job, but you are putting yourself at a little bit more of a disadvantage starting out with somebody like that. And so helping people understand that these are the things that are, at stake and at play can hopefully get more people to engage. And that idea of community, right? Like we often probably hear, and I think young voters may feel this, particularly, I'm just one vote. My vote doesn't matter. There are many reasons why people feel that way. And if everybody felt that way, what we will see and what we have seen, right, in the past is each one person adds up, and in the aggregate, that can really make or break the difference in how an election turns out. And therefore, it's like you have to have faith and trust that, yes, it's one vote, but it's one vote of a collective. And if you take that vote away, it is doing more damage than a person may believe or understand it to be doing.
Absolutely. And with that in mind, we have seen influencers beginning to come into that space, into the voting space. I'm not certain they always stay in the C3 space, but they certainly are beginning to have quite an impact. I think in many instances, we believe that that's positive and that they are encouraging folks to vote, especially their following their young folks, the younger demographic, to actually engage. And I think that to the extent that we can continue to have that engagement, but keep it on the C3 side, we will probably be so much in terms of that process. And I think that they are trying very hard to do that. So to your point, we do need for the younger folks to engage on the issues that matter to them and hear from the people and the messengers with the narrative that they understand. I want to go to your expertise. You are a census expert. There is no question about that. Could you tell us the impact of the census on voting rights, on your ability? Obviously, it does go into redistricting and gerrymandering, but just broadly speaking, why the census is important, why we all need to support the fair and balanced approach to the census. And can you please tell us more about that?
Sure, absolutely. So the census is mandated by the Constitution for the purposes of apportionment, which then, of course, as you noted, flows straight to redistricting. So it at its core is about democracy. There are, of course, a lot of other important, impacts of the census, including, being the basis upon which trillions of dollars are allocated from federal funds to the states, right? And so if there are inaccurate counts, then that is going to skew people being able to get their fair share of resources. I like to say that while the ideal of a census is to get a perfect 100% count of everybody, right, in the country, I also understand perfection is not possible. But the big problem is that it's not a situation where every group is missed at the same rate, right? Which would then be, even though you don't have 100% count, that's still okay because proportionally everybody still is being properly represented, right, as groups. What we see and what we know is that different groups are missed more often in the community. That falls particularly on marginalized communities, including communities of color, and therefore, and this happens decade after decade, which just continues to compound the inequitable, allocation of resources, be that actual dollars and funds, be that in the redistricting context, be that in even the ability to plan. We all use census data to make decisions on how to best use our limited resources, whether the government uses it, businesses use it, groups, C3 groups use it, right, to try to figure out where are we going to focus our limited resources, what areas or what issues, and all of that is dictated by what the data tell us. And so that is why, for me, census and census data is such a core civil rights issue, and it really is a backbone to the work that needs to be done. Other, ways in which census impacts voting in particular, the ability to make Section 203 determinations, right? Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act, which requires language assistance in certain jurisdictions that meet a numeric or percentage threshold. That comes directly from the Census Bureau, that comes from the American Community Survey, and without having accurate data, we will not be able to ensure that those who are who have the numbers to meet the need, to show the need for language assistance, that will all fall by the wayside. It will not accurately capture everybody who should be captured. And so we know that, and then census data, of course, for all types of litigation is going to be the bedrock of how people are able to show things like population size or impact or the like. So for me, that's why the census is so important. And what many are not aware of, hopefully most people have heard of the census, most people have participated or had someone in their household participate in the census. What people probably aren't aware of is that it takes an entire decade to put on a census. So beginning about the 2030 census. And these are the years that are really critical for having proper funding amounts for the Census Bureau so they can run the tests that they need to run in a timely fashion. It's when they make decisions about different operational aspects, right? How much do they rely on, say, administrative records and the like? And so this is the time when these decisions are made, and it's important that we're paying attention. It's important that we're engaging, because once the decisions are made, it is much harder to undo them, particularly as you get closer and closer to the taking of the census. For the last several census cycles, it took an entire year to print all of the forms. If you find an error is an error that must be corrected. If there's something that is like this isn't the best way to say it for my community, that might, you're going to be stuck with that if you don't engage with that, earlier in the process. The last thing I will say about that we should just all be aware of, and is going to be important for voting rights moving forward, is Office of Management and Budget just released earlier this year a new set of standards around how racial and ethnic data are collected. It's named Statistical Policy Directive 15, or SPD 15. It's a terrible name, but basically what the new standards do, which is wonderful, is it creates a new minimal reporting category, which is Middle Eastern North African. Prior to this change, members of those communities were counted as white, which many members in the community would not feel is representative of how they identify their racial and ethnic identity. It also will mandate the collection of detailed disaggregated data across the different categories. So, for example, for Asian American, it mandates the collection and reporting of things like Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Filipino, and the like. And that is the treatment that is across all of the different racial and ethnic categories. So we will have a wealth of knowledge to really be able to inform things like redistricting and other litigation that we all engage in.
Terry, you have been a leader with the ABA's Standing Committee on Elections and a number of other roles within the ABA as it relates to voting rights, election protection, and all of that. How do you see the ABA moving forward, being able to work in the area of coalition building and networking among civil rights attorneys, election law experts, advocacy organizations, in combating voter suppression and just unfair voter practices? And this is strictly from the view of how our organization, the ABA, working with our respective community engagement organizations and others, how can we become better engaged in making certain that we are part of grassroots and legislative actions that need to happen to protect voting rights?
So I think I'll harken back to something that you had said earlier and about being trusted messengers. And I think the ABA certainly serves a very important role. The stature of the organization, the stature of the attorneys that participate can lend a lot of credence to helping to dispel mis and disinformation. That can help to assuage fears about different aspects of election and how elections are run. This does also tie directly to mis and disinformation as well. But I know that often the inability for people to sort of understand what is fact and what is not fact. Somebody like the ABA and ABA members have that level of credibility to be able to, you don't need to be concerned about that. Having, somebody like the ABA, the Standing Committee on Election Law, and the Civil Rights and Social Justice section, all of these different folks being able to stand up and say, hey, we care about these issues, we have expertise in these issues, and this is what is, I think cannot be overstated. Additionally, the Standing Committee on Election Law has a policy guidelines or guidance, if you will, on all the different aspects of voting that I would certainly encourage people to look at, to utilize. It not only helps to provide information about what is, it also has recommendations about what should be. And so this is something for a little bit, maybe more for ABA members to think about, like engaging at their local level with their election officials or policymakers to say, like, hey, are we doing the best we can do to achieve these goals? And if not, here are some well thought out recommendations that are very based in the expertise of members of that committee, which is one that spans the different political spectrum, that spans different positions, if you will, in the election work. So we have election administrators, right, on the committee. We also have advocates, such as myself, and litigators and the like. And so I would say that the ABA and members of the ABA can really play an important role in helping to ensure that that we're able to maintain the dignity and the legitimacy of our democracy in this country.
Well, I thank you for that. And that is one of the reasons why our initiative for the CRSJ initiative of perfecting democracy is really all about how do we get our ABA members engaged from leading up to the elections to election day to post-elections, where we know a lot of activity go on in terms of how now are we going to uphold the rule of law to ensure that every vote counts. And that as we move towards ending this wonderful conversation, I'd like to ask you, is there anything else that you would like to add to this conversation that we may not have covered?
I think the main thing I would just add, and I do think we covered it, but I will just put a fine point on it, is certainly encouraging people to think more about the census and engage on the census and understanding how the census really is a through line for pretty much all the work that we do. And then also really lean into engaging around election issues, whether at whatever level, low hanging fruit, talk to your friends and family. We know often friends and family are trusted messengers, certainly true for the Asian American community. I'm confident true for many other communities, and helping people understand what's going on, the importance of voting, and assuage fears that people may have about the process. And I think that it's one of those things that, similar to what I said earlier about every vote counts, every voice also counts. And so, ABA members have a very big voice, very big platform, as does the ABA overall. So I think making sure that we're making good strategic use, recognizing everybody's very busy, we're very busy, members, but strategically using our voices at the right times in the right place is something that I think will reap a lot of benefits for our community at large.
Well, Terry, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the conversation. I've learned a lot just listening to you today, and I'm absolutely certain that our members who are listening and the broader audience that tunes into this chat will learn a lot as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you again